The bliss of the abyss, it's here now.
Welcome back to the Bliss of the Abyss, a lovely little special edition before I go away on my honeymoon, which is in under 12 hours. So, lucky you, here's a little extra thing to keep it ticking over while I'm away. And what better way to do that than having the wonderful Sarah Sigal on the podcast. Originally from Chicago, Sarah Sigal is a freelance writer, dramaturg, director and researcher working across new writing, adaptation, site-specific theatre, film and fiction. She has an amazing CV and was an excellent chat, I have to say. Most importantly, of course, her first novel, The Socialite Spy, will be published in October 2023. So please click the link that's going to be in the show notes. Please put in the advance orders. It really, really helps boost that up, potentially become a bestseller and helps her get another one made and everything. And as you can hear, Sarah is a wonderful person. So, and before I forget, at the end of the show is a few bonus minutes of Sarah and I talking about one Jewish boy, his potential future plans, or whether or not it will ever have a future plan, who knows. And for those of you who listen to the Patreon episodes, there's an amazing one up with Peter and Tom today, absolute barnstormer. If you don't, please go to the patreon.com/bliss of the abyss, where for as small a price as a couple of pennies in my cup, you can listen to over 65 bonus shows as of counting, and new ones released every week. Without any further ado, please welcome to the show, Sarah Sigal. Anyway, Sarah Sigal, welcome to the Bliss of the Abyss. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Goodbye. Here we are. We're doing a podcast. There's no pressure on it at all, apart from to promote your book as brilliantly as possible. So let's start and end with your fantastic new book that's coming out in October.
It is October 19th.
Called The Socialite Spy?
The Socialite Spy. That's the title of the series, because hopefully it's going to be a series. Mm-hmm. There is a second book coming out at some point, maybe a third, if lots of lovely people buy the first two. Mm-hmm. And the subtitle of the first book is In Pursuit of a King. And that is out October 19th.
Right, and as I understand, it's about Wallace.
Yes.
And the king.
Yes.
The defector king.
Yes.
So I know a bit about this history. It's kind of fascinating and really interesting. And obviously from an American point of view, I'd imagine you have an interesting take on it as well. So for people who don't know the story, do you want to tell them a little bit about the story and then what your take on it is?
Sure. So the story is, I mean, there are a lot of different angles on this story, but I'll be as sort of history textbook as possible. Edward VIII came to the throne at the beginning of 1936. He had already had lots of kind of leanings in the direction of the German embassy, mm-hmm. shall we say, but he was still set to be coronated the next year. But he was also kind of known as the playboy prince. He was out, golfing and yachting and playing polo and having affairs with men's wives, and he never settled down, and he never got married, and he never had children. So I think for many reasons, Downing Street and the palace were nervous. Yeah. They didn't think he necessarily was cut out to be king, but his father died and then he became king, and he was already having an affair with Wallis Simpson, who was a married American woman who had been divorced once, which was already was already a black mark against her name. She was a sort of, kind of socialite, knew lots of people, met him through his previous mistress, and then stole him out from under the so to speak, the previous mistress, and who was also American, which is interesting. And they hit it off, or he hit it off with her. The story is that he was very, very attached to her, very obsessed with her. And she kind of went off him, but then was sort of stuck in the bed that she made. But she had had a relationship with him for a few years, and that was the other reason why the palace was nervous, because they didn't know what was going to happen with this mistress, and he had no smokescreen of a wife. Plenty of, kings and queens. Well, we don't know about queens, but certainly plenty of kings before had wives and mistresses, but they were loose cannons. She was also suspected of having a relationship with the German embassy. She was rumored to be having an affair with the German ambassador von Ribbentrop. It was all kind of messy. And the simple story is that he wanted to have her by his side on the throne. He said, she's going to get a divorce, I'm going to marry her. And they said, no, you're not. And he said, yes, I am. And they said, well, she's not going to be queen. And he said, yes, she will be. And they said, you're dreaming. And he stepped down. And there is a story around it being for love, and it's a great love story, but there were so many agendas at play. And the reason why I kind of came to this story is because my grandmother, as you can hear from my voice, I'm American. My American grandmother was in New Jersey in the 1930s, and she became, because there was a press blackout in Britain on this affair, because they were trying to protect the palace, but there wasn't a press blackout anywhere else in the world.
Right.
But this is 1936, so, people don't necessarily, they're not getting the news that other people are getting in other parts of the world. So people in Britain, when he did abdicate and when he named her, people were like, who's this woman?
Yeah,
who's he
where's
talking
this
about?
come
They had
from?
no idea who she was. But Americans were fascinated by it, as we always are with the royal family. And my grandmother had the idea that it was it was a plot. She thought it was a sort of something cooked up by the FBI, who were, I think, I can't remember if they were monitoring them. The FBI did monitor the then Duke and Duchess of Windsor later on, when they were
During the German tour?
Yeah, and when they were in the Bahamas and they were making trips to America.
Yes.
But at the time, MI5 was following around the king and Wallace, because he was spending so much money on her. Diamond bracelets, necklaces, couture gowns, all that stuff, that they were concerned about what was happening and who she was. He was also leaking information. He would leave. He didn't take his job seriously. He didn't take the weekly meetings with the PM seriously. He would leave notes and papers around, and she would see them, and so they never really knew. It's a bit like Trump and Mar-a-Lago.
Right.
They didn't know who was also getting to see all these classified documents. And so probably not knowing that MI5 was actually following them, my grandmother was like, I think that there was something fishy going on. And her theory was that Wallace Simpson was a plant to get him off the throne. And my book isn't about that. So my book is based on a play, which was called Agent of Influence, and the play was a one-woman show starring Rebecca Dunn, who was a longtime collaborator of mine, and we kind of did some devising and some work together on it and put it on in various places. And I kind of translated my grandmother's idea and made it into a story about, there's a woman who's a socialite, then becomes a socialite spy. She's called Pamela. Pamela is a fashion journalist and very socially connected. And when people were being recruited by MI5 and MI6 back in that period, it was usually like, who did you know, and who knew who, and who went to school with whose sister, and who did you bump into at the club. There wasn't like much of a vetting process. It was all social cachet. And so she's approached to spy on Wallace and the king, because she knows, she doesn't know them, but she knows people who knows them.
She's in the circle.
She's on the
connected.
scene.
People
She goes to
might
lots
run
of
into each other.
parties. She's always in the Ritz bar drinking martinis, and she can kind of come back with the intel. And at first she kind of goes, I'm not cut out for this. I just, I go shopping and I go to parties, and my husband's in the House of Lords. And because it's sort of a story of a woman who's always been told, no, you can't, don't be stupid. Your job is to get married and look pretty. And so she ends up believing that. But really, it's about a woman finding her kind of inner strength and ingenuity. And in the meantime, she discovers how full of Nazis the British upper classes are. And she doesn't even really, she's sort of aware of Mussolini and she's aware of Hitler, but then she kind of, it's like somebody says, watch out for the color pink, and that's all you can see.
Right.
And then she starts to really listen and pay attention and understand what's going on. And by the end of the book, her eyes are kind of opened. It's sort of about, white women using their privilege for good. Basically.
Okay.
Yeah, and fascism in Britain, sort of to counter the kind of mythology of fascism was an Italian problem, it was a German problem, the British are the victors of the war, blah, 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 when really it's far more complicated than that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I remember reading up about the fascism in the rest of Europe during that time. And in America, they had these huge rallies, the American Nazi Party
and an
stuff.
attempted coup.
Yeah, exactly. So, these things are always much more complicated than the big, obvious narratives that we're told. So you fit all of that in one book, or is this the arc of your 3 book that you're telling me?
Yeah, so I'm working on book 2 now. Book 3 is a sort of glimmer in my eye, but it's sort of, on the surface, it's about this woman and her journey into espionage. And it kind of carries us through into the pre-war years and into the war, through the war. But it's really about fascism in allied countries and the complexity of that. So book 2, I'm at the beginning of that journey, but it's sort of starting in 1938 or 1939. Okay. And it focuses on, because it's still following Wallace and Edward, what happened was when he stepped off the throne, he abdicated in December of 36, and he and Wallace moved to France, and they puttered around France. They had a house in Paris and a house on the Riviera, and they got into more trouble. And the second book is about her continuing to follow them around, because now that they're not in the palace, they want them to stay out of Britain because the government is worried that he has the potential to be a lightning rod for a fifth column. Mosley is making overtures to him, Hitler is making overtures to him, and this is even before the war. And she has her own relationship with it's all a bit murky. And so Pamela is now working, in the first book she's working for the Times, in the second book she's working for Vogue, and at the moment, I'm thinking she's sort of set up to take on a fictitious role where she's sort of an ambassador between the English couture houses and the French ones. And she's writing about French fashion shows, but it's a good cover for her to be traveling around Paris and continuing this sort of friendship with the now Duke and Duchess of Windsor. But then the war begins, and when the war started, for a while the Duke was he was given a ceremonial military role of inspecting French defense lines, which is a really great thing to be doing when you're passing intelligence to the Germans. So it's kind of about how the royal family harbors Nazis and then protects those Nazis. But it's about the beginning of the war, and in this way that Britain wasn't just the sort of savior of Europe. France they didn't just roll over and play dead. The story of fascism in France and the Vichy government collaboration is far more complicated, and there's a lot of interesting stuff around who was responsible for what and how things played out. And so it's another book that's about royal family, it's about diplomacy, international relations, espionage, and also fashion, because couture and fashion were even more important for France than they were for Britain. But during the war, fashion became Vogue was seen by the government as of national importance, because they could feed intelligence and propaganda to women through Vogue.
Really?
And
I
so
didn't know this.
it's amazing. And so Vogue became this crucial way of communicating to women.
What? So it was an organ of the state?
Yes.
Vogue? No way, really?
Yeah, essentially. The very, very clever woman who was the editor of Vogue during the war was called Audrey Withers. And she would have, because they were because it was a time of rationing, ration cars, ration clothing, food. Vogue had to be behind that because they were the number one women's magazine. And so, and then there was the sort of designers who were designing like, I can't remember, utility outfits, the women's suit that had used the least amount of fabric,
right?
Or they would make so-called siren suits, like the jumpsuit you put on when you went into the one piece thing you'd put on when you go into the basement or the shelter. So
Vogue designed those.
Well, Vogue would promote these things. It's like all about how to be a good citizen.
Of course.
But fashionably.
But fashionably.
Fashionable. So it's, and fashion is always about like soft power.
Right.
So the book is sort of about looking at espionage and kind of betrayal and military intelligence through the lens of like fashion and soft
wow
power.
Okay, this summer's fallout shelters must have.
Yes. I mean, essentially, they had Cecil Beaton doing war like photography. They had Hardy Amies was a spy in Belgium. Norman Hartnell was designing like uniform. It was really because they mobilized the whole country for the war effort. Like Lee Miller, she's American but based in London, and she had been a model and a fashion photographer, and then she, by the end of the war, she's like photographing, like I think it was Buchenwald. It's sort of amazing. These people who lived in one world that suddenly lived in another, and in Paris, what's the kind of the sort of interesting thing was like who collaborated and to what degree, and which couture houses closed down operations. So like you have on one end of the spectrum, you have the Cartier family who were very, very pro-de Gaulle and pro-resistance, and they upped sticks and went to London and were supportive of the French government in exile. And then on the other end of the spectrum is Coco Chanel.
Oh, I've heard the Chanel stuff. And Versace, right? Isn't Donatella, wasn't she?
Well, she wasn't. She was not yet born. The House of Versace didn't.
Were they not? Am I being?
Balenciaga.
Okay.
They collaborated. There were a few other. There was a sort of famous syndicate of French fashion houses who had to find a way of preventing the Germans from taking the entire French couture industry and removing it and taking it to Berlin.
Right.
Like they did with all the other industries, and they had to do some horse trading. But in the and so on one hand, they were arguing that they were protecting jobs. On the other hand, a lot of those tailors and seamstresses and designers were Jews who were deported. So it's a complicated, interesting thing.
Wow. Okay. Oh, here we go. We have our first introduction of the angle grinder. It's been quiet for a while. I'm just going to click. That will remind me. Shut up! Stop grinding angles.
Oh my God.
Have some respect.
It's the worst. It's the worst sound in the world.
I know.
Just get it over with.
Vauxhall and Stockwell. Vauxhall
Yeah,
and Stockwell.
yeah.
Hugo Boss was involved with that, wasn't he, as well?
Hugo Boss, yeah. He was designing uniforms for the Germans.
So Donatella was just like, she just fancied. I know she's like later, but there's no history of the family doing that stuff?
That I don't know. I don't know about maybe. I don't know when the House of Versace started. I don't think they got started till after the war.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know which Italian designers were involved with, like, Mussolini, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's so and then there's one of my characters is Elsa Schiaparelli, who was like this very mercurial. She was here, she was there, she was in Spain, then she was in New York, and then she was in Brazil, and then she was back in France. She sort of mysteriously traveled all over the place when no one was traveling, and it's sort of, some people say she was a part of the resistance, and some people say she was a Nazi spy, and some people, it's sort of, she must have had an arrangement with somebody, or maybe she was a double agent or something. It's kind of, it's so complicated, and a lot of people didn't survive the war, they didn't tell their story, or the files got lost, or
Yeah.
There's actually a actually.
Yeah, it's fine.
There's I think it's on now. There's an exhibition at the V&A about Coco Chanel, and when I first saw it, I had a conversation with them on Twitter and via email about asking them whether they were going to come out with the fact that she had been a spy for the Germans and the mistress of a German officer and lived at the Ritz and all this stuff. And they were like, well, we're going to focus on her fashion and not her life. Just, fashion washing.
Yeah.
Nazis.
Yeah. Oh, God. That's particularly fucking shocking.
My gosh.
Shall I just throw stones at him?
Oh, my God.
I know.
It's like, dude, is this what you do on a sunny Friday afternoon?
Yeah, shouldn't he be knocking off? What's he doing?
Oh, God.
Anyway.
All
Okay.
right.
Well, okay. I mean, that sounds absolutely fascinating. So that's out in October. Yeah.
So the first book about the abdication crisis in 1936 is out in October, and all the stuff with France and the invasion of France is. I don't know when that will be out. I am working on it as we speak. I'm still kind of knee deep in the research and trying to come up with
But it's a novel, right? Isn't it?
It is
it's
a
your
novel,
first
yeah.
novel,
It is
right?
my first novel.
Yeah, because you've done sort of like academic stuff, research and dramaturgy and all those kinds of things before.
My background's really in theater.
Yeah.
Playwriting, dramaturgy, theater academia. I wrote one kind of theater academic monograph, but my first novel, and trying to teach myself to write fiction after years and years of training and experience as a playwright is a real leap.
So what made you want to transition over to novels and fiction?
I was at a wedding. And I saw some people I hadn't seen in a while who had started a literary agency, and I'd had a few glasses of wine.
Okay.
And I got it into my head that I would tell them I was writing a novel.
And you weren't.
And I was not. It's the most random reason for a career change I've ever had. They were like, "Oh, great, send us some pages." I thought, well, why not?
Yeah.
Might as well give it a whirl.
Better get a couple of pages.
Yeah, and then there was a pandemic and I had some time to write, so...
Oh, you were one of those people who actually took advantage of the spare time.
I did.
Good.
I did. More out of panic than anything else, because I saw the theater industry collapsing and was basically terrified myself into finishing my novel.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic.
Fear is a really good motivator for me.
That's good. Well, that's good for you to know, I guess. If you're ever up against the deadline, just
Make
I don't know.
Terrified.
Yeah, exactly. Pay someone to hunt you down.
Yeah.
And then jump from coffee shop to coffee shop, finishing the second book. Wow. Amazing. Well, amazing. Okay, fantastic. So let's jump back, because obviously that's the present. Let's go to the past. You said you're American. I understand you're from Chicago.
I am.
How'd you end up in Brixton? What are you doing here? Get out of my house.
How did I end up in Brixton? I have actually lived in and around Brixton myself for many, many years. I first came to London. I was living in New Cross when I first moved here in 2005.
How was it?
You know,
yeah.
if you are someone who is from Chicago
Yeah.
and you are used to hearing about reports of violent crime in the news on a regular basis, New Cross in 2005 is not a big deal.
Right.
However, if you are a normal Londoner, New Cross in 2005 was probably a little intimidating.
I was there today. It's New Cross in 2023.
Isn't much better.
It's not great, but it certainly doesn't have the rep that Chicago does on the international stage.
No. I came to Goldsmiths to do an MA.
Ah, yes.
On the Writing for Performance course, which was like a mix of dramaturgy and playwriting. And it was, met a lot of people, did a lot of stuff, made a lot of things, wrote a lot of things. My first play, which was my first sort of professional play, which was my end-of-year project, got produced, and that was really exciting. And being young, I was like, wow, I should just stay here. This is a good place to be. I like these people. And then I needed a visa, so I did a PhD for a visa, which again, I'm motivated by fear. You know,
There we go, yeah.
my PhD because
Right,
I was
of
terrified of
course.
being deported.
Yeah. So it is, yeah. Well, look, if you know your artistic triggers, well, lean into them.
It's not necessarily a healthy, I would like motivation.
However
that's
it
not
comes
quite
out,
so.
as long as you get the goods at the end of the day. So had you been interested in theatre back in Chicago? I mean, you must have been. Well, what kind of stuff had you done back there?
So I was a kid when I moved here. I was 22. I was fresh from undergrad. I mean, like a lot of people, I started off doing like children's community theater when I was 8 or 9 and did lots of acting. I was in musicals. And, like a lot of people. I
didn't know you could sing.
Maybe I'll put it this way. I played Adelaide in Guys and Dolls when I was 14. It's a long time ago.
Yeah,
Who knows if I could do that now?
We'll find out.
Oh, boy. And then in high school, I got into things like devising and directing because we were very influenced by like the Second City School.
Oh, yeah, that's right there, isn't it?
It's in Chicago.
That's huge.
It's really... Viola Spolin and Second City and all of that's really in our veins. And, I don't know if all kids who study drama have, like, improv skills drilled into them like, you're doing basic training.
I don't think so, no.
I mean, we had real trial by fire, basic training style improv training.
Yeah.
Which is quite scary.
Yeah, I think it's quite it's a related but separate set of skills. I mean, a lot of actors can't improv for toffee. No. They just like, tell me what to do and where to do it, and I'll do it. Yeah. I promise I'll do a good job. But coming up with stuff
on the fly. I mean, it's really useful.
Yeah.
It's really useful. I mean, I don't think it felt natural for me because the combination of having to think something up on the spot that was good and be watched at the same time was a bit scary, but I really credit it with the work I did later when I came to the UK, my PhD, and also the book I turned my PhD into is called Writing and Collaborative Theater Making, and I devoted most of my professional life as a playwright and deviser to kind of that collaborative process, which so much of that came out of having the fear of Second City drilled into me. So I did, and then I wrote my first play when I was a young whippersnapper of 18. I'd gone to university.
Oh gosh, what was it? What was your first play? Do you look back on it and cringe, or do you stand by it?
I look back on it and I think, that is weird. I watched, it was the age of, this is how old I am, it's the age of Sex and the City.
Oh, yeah.
And so my first play was clearly the product of a young person who had watched too much Sex and the City because it was about, it was called Blind Date.
Okay.
And it was a bit of a Blind Date meets Waiting for Godot.
All right.
And it's about this woman sitting in a bar with her friend and she's like waiting for a date to show up and he never shows up. And so it's about two single people in their 30s talking about the fear of being single and a fear of death. And I wrote this when I was 18. Which is so
Having
weird.
a wild time, and carefree.
Yeah. And I remember my parents went to see it and they were like, why did you write this? How do you know anything about this? And in retrospect, it is bizarre.
Yeah.
That as an 18-year-old, I was like, I think my main concern is single women in their 30s. Again, Sex and the City has a lot to answer for.
Yeah, so much to answer for. Did you see any of the new ones?
Yes.
You must have if you were an acolyte.
Yeah, I mean, it all went downhill after the end of the actual original series.
None of the films are any good.
I mean, whatever. They're not great. And they get worse and worse as they go along. Yeah, I mean, the new series. I haven't seen season 2. I probably will watch it.
There we go.
But it's it's sort of. You watch it now, and you're like, it's just a bunch of rich women complaining about their small problems.
They're just there picking up a paycheck, phoning it in, or is there some...
They're not phoning it in.
Okay. But the Sparky one's gone, isn't she?
Samantha was the best.
Right.
Samantha was the best. She was my favorite, and I think she was right to...
she could sense.
She could sense
even though it's hundreds of thousands, you know what? Some things aren't worth it.
I mean, Kim Cattrall she's sort of amazing. Yeah. But yeah, it's a thing that's of its time, and you can't really rewatch it through a modern lens because you're like, it's just like 4 privileged white women complaining.
Right.
And now they've like tried to make it a little bit more kind of current and diverse and whatever, which I...
Oh, right. Is it a bit tokenistic, though?
Yeah, well, it just feels like someone's wearing a dress that doesn't fit. You know, it's the best way I can put it.
You don't mean a character in the show, because presumably that kind of storyline comes up every now and again.
Patricia Fields, the costume designer, has, as always, done a marvelous job. But also, and people have commented on this, the levels of wealth in the second season or series are so... I mean, in the first iteration, they were all pretty, you know, doing pretty well. Yeah. But now it's like the places they're living in and the clothes they're wearing are so insane. Yeah. You're kind of like, it's sort of...
I wonder how much appetite there is for that, because, I mean, there are shows that show the uber wealthy that are popular, right? You think Succession, sort of White Lotus, but it's all about showing how that's horrible and skewering it, as opposed to just like, I'm super wealthy and my problems are all champagne problems and feel bad for me.
About wealthy people, but it's sort of low key in a way. But this just sort of feels like... This is
ostentatious, is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of shows do too many seasons and should only have done like one or two. And a lot of shows try to come back and cash in on what they had. And I mean, at the end of the day, as a writer, I just think a lot of people... I was talking about this today with someone. You know, the trend of adapting films into stage musicals. It's just make a new show.
God, what have they got in the West End now? It's Bake Off the musical. Yeah. Can you believe that? Yeah. I mean, I don't know who's in it. I'm sure it's a good thing.
Maybe it's great. I mean, I'm not a Bake Off person, so I don't know. But I just... A lot of the time, people are too scared to take a risk on something new. Yeah. It's like... I'm going a little off piste here, but it was what Philip Pullman said about the Roald Dahl censorship scandal. He was look, it's of its time, leave it alone, invest in someone new. Right. Move on. You know, I think James Bond is James Bond. Roald Dahl is Roald Dahl. Let them be. Mm-hmm. People want to read them, they can read them. You don't have to move on and like invest in new writing.
Right. Yeah. Well, what do you think about people who say, I just play devil's advocate, people who say, you know, like King Lear can be played by a woman, right? So then why shouldn't James Bond be played by a woman?
I mean, I guess I don't care about that stuff. I don't care. I mean, sure, girl, you know, there shouldn't be any law against, you know, doing or not doing things, or everybody should be allowed to play anybody they want, as long as it's not, you know, blacking up or cripping up or any of that stuff. Right, sure. But, I mean, this is not a popular viewpoint, especially as far as playwrights go, but...
Go for it.
Let's just put Shakespeare to bed for a while.
Oh!
For
a while. How long are we talking? On ice?
I mean, can you imagine...
Not literally
Can you imagine... I think we're past that point. If the entire, no theater in the world did Shakespeare for 1 year. 1 year. Can you imagine how many new plays, or other, not even new plays, but like plays by other Jacobean or Elizabethan or Golden Age writers could get out there? You know, it's like, do we need the umpteenth production of Hamlet? No, and I love Hamlet. Hamlet's my favorite Shakespeare, but I just think people are so scared to take risks, and people like a name, they like something they can bet on.
It's only got worse since the pandemic.
And it's only got worse since the pandemic, and it just really feels like it's programming and producing and funding driven by fear. Yeah. And I actually think TV is doing more in terms of experimentation and putting money behind new ideas and new writers than theater is or seems to be.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. Yeah, it's definitely got to find a new way forward. Like, you look at all the new stuff that's being put on in the West. Like, they just reopened We Will Rock You.
Oh, God.
With, like, Ben Elton wearing some terrible wig. And you just think, this is surely not the right direction to be going in.
And, you know, there's obviously, we should always have a sort of variety of things for people to see. and we should always stage classics, and we should always have commercial shows and musicals and whatever, but there needs to be a healthy ecosystem that allows, you know, the new growth to take roots.
Right.
In the old growth,
in the old growth, the dead
prune
heads.
the, you know, and if Shakespeare's the dead tree that gets pruned, I'm not gonna.
Oh, Shakespeare's a dead tree. I'm not allowing it.
If you have to fell that redwood, I'll be out there with a chainsaw.
Oh God, the views expressed are not those of the management of the Bliss of the Abyss. That's fantastic. Yeah. Okay. What else? Oh. I know something I wanted to ask you about. How different is it in terms of the publishing world, with the academia side, and now moving over to the fiction side? Is it the same kind of struggles and conversations, or are the people who operate in these worlds just almost so different that they're separate worlds? Totally
different. I mean, it's good. I have had an experience of working with editors on like journal articles and my monograph and lots of, because, you know, it's really good to have that kind of really intense back and forth with your writing. And of course I've had plenty of that with like dramaturgs and directors and actors in rehearsal room, but it's a really different kettle of fish when you're working on your own and you get a document with 150,000 track changes and you have to take in that volume, and if there are major notes that require rethinking and restructuring, it can get really stressful. And it, you know, sometimes often for the good of the work, but it can be hard going. And I'm glad I've been through that. And I mean, just the writing process for this is so different because it's like enjoyable to make things up rather than when you're working from a research perspective, and it for me at least, it feels like really hard labor.
Right.
But also, it's like, it's a commercial venture. And it's the one time in my life where I'm kind of gone, I'm really happy to do something commercial.
Yeah.
You know, I'm happy to, the other day I got my first review on, I can't remember what it's called. It's the website where the Net Galley, where they put up like all the books that are available for people to review.
Oh, right.
And the first review I got was from like someone's granddad on Twitter who was like, I really enjoyed this and I learned a lot about fashion. And I was like, great. I'm really glad that some anonymous man in his 70s or 80s is reading my book and enjoying it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I am happy to write something that's like enjoyable. I hope something political is taken from it. If not, it doesn't bother me.
Right.
I have embedded my own values and thoughts, and I like to think I haven't written a kind of classic period piece, Downton Abbey style. I think that it questions very much the values of the upper classes, full stop, in the royal family. And I've, tried to include scenes with like queer characters and foreign characters. I'm trying to, sort of trying to bring in topics that we are discussing today and remind people that these things are not new.
Right.
People were bisexual in 1936. People were trans in 1936, for instance. So.
But were they lumisexual? I just learned this the other day.
What is lumisexual?
Attracted to light fittings. Think I'm making it up?
I mean, I'm not gonna kink shame. I'm not gonna kink shame.
It's not a kink. It's a whole orientation.
It's a light fixture. That's
dangerous.
What about a light?
Yeah. Well, the best kind of things in sex are dangerous.
Best kind of sex usually involves the potential for death.
I remember reading this story a few years ago about this guy who got caught in a hotel room having sex with his bike. And everyone I say to, I'm like, how do you think he was doing it? Because the image I had in my head is the spokes. Exactly what I thought. It's not the spokes.
What?
Because how would you do with the spokes? That doesn't work.
How would you do it with any? Like, is he sticking something up?
No.
A handlebar?
Yeah, you get the grip. You tease the grip off the handlebar.
Yeah, and then
there we go.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know. But
God.
I do think if he's alone in his hotel room with the bike, I'm not sure he should be arrested for that.
No. I mean, as long as the bike consented.
I'm not sure it did. He stuck an A4 piece of paper on it, I can say. I love you, Gary.
I mean, people should be allowed to do whatever
As long as it doesn't hurt
as long
bikes.
as it doesn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
Bikes included.
Yeah, no. I know. Ooh, the doorbell. How exciting. Hopefully that's going to be answered. Can you hear people getting up? The pitter-patter of feet?
Yes.
You can?
I heard a movement.
Yes. There we go. All good. So,
where are we?
Oh, where were we?
So
We're talking about men
distracted.
having sex with bicycles. I'm sorry, that's me. Sorry. Let's try and get us back on track. What you said sparked off. So with fiction, so obviously if you're doing like research and stuff, there's a lot more sort of, I guess maybe this isn't the right way of putting it, but I'm going to say it this way, like opinion that has to come forward, and you don't want to sit on the fence with this kind of stuff. But when you're presenting a panoply of different characters with different viewpoints, it almost gives you a freer reign. At least that's from like outside looking in. Is that how it feels?
Well, I had the kind of beginning of all this, I had a really interesting revelation, which was I had written, so this was a play, and the play was a monologue, it was a one-woman show, so it was all first person. And then my instinct as a playwright was to write the novel in first person, which it did, because it felt natural, and it felt like the best way of telling the story and conveying character and all of that. And then the woman who is now my agent, when she first took a look at the manuscript, when she was considering whether she was going to sign me or not, said, well, have you thought about writing it in third person? And my initial reaction was, oh no, I can't do that. How would I do that? Like it felt unnatural and scary. But then when I tried it, I went, oh, right, I have much more freedom. Because then you can decide how you want to tell the story, whose perspective it's from. Is it multiple perspectives? Is it an omniscient narrator? And so it is still, the way I've done it is it's still through the lens of the main character. So it's a third person narrator, but the only person whose mind you get an insight into is her.
Right.
You're not really seeing stuff that she's not experienced. There's like an exception of the kind of there's a sort of prelude, the prologue at the beginning of the book, but other than that, we're always with her. We're very aligned with her.
Right.
But yeah, so it's everything sort of seen her through her perspective, but she does encounter throughout the book, she encounters lots of different people. She encounters like really staunch anti-fascists. Like she goes to like a queer house party and she meets some men who had lived in Berlin. They're sort of in the kind of Christopher Isherwood crowd in Berlin in the 1920s, and they have a particular insight into Hitler's Germany because they were there at the end of the party, so to speak.
Right, the swinging Weimar years.
Because I was thinking, well, how else is she really going to get an insight into how bad things are? And I mean, some people do. I don't want to be didactic. There's a real danger of being like, yes, well, Hitler's just terrible, because a lot of people thought he was fine. A lot of people didn't care. Some people just didn't know. There were people who, they were like, well, he's not the communists, so that's good,
Inflation's down.
Inflation. Well, the German economy seems to have stabilized, so that's good, But I also have that perspective in there too, and the flip-floppers, and I was thinking, and writing as a Jewish writer, obviously I'm going to have my own perspective on that history, and I didn't want to make the mistake of making it too knowing, too like, ooh, the Holocaust is coming, I really didn't want to do that. And realistically, this woman doesn't really know any Jews.
No.
There are a couple of Jewish characters, and I wanted to have their presence be like kind of a little bit minimal just for the sake of the story and the real, not that I'm trying to marginalize Jews as a Jew, but it felt realistic that maybe she might have an encounter with people, but I wanted it to be effective. So yeah, it's tricky. It's like I want to present my own feelings about fascism being
Yeah.
bad, but I don't want to do it in a way that feels sort of hackneyed.
Right, and you don't want to crowbar it into the
No.
story if that's not what the story is.
No.
And if you're going to follow her throughout the years of the war, there'll be smatterings of that
All
anyway,
kinds of
because
stuff.
that's what happened, and
Yeah.
stuff comes to light.
And whenever I feel like it's getting too serious or it's feeling a little bit too kind of like a stock storyline, I keep thinking about the humor. So I think about it as if Nancy Mitford wrote John le Carré stories. So I've taken on that 1930s style, kind of Noel Coward, Eva Lemoine, Nancy Mitford, like that humor, that kind of biting humor. And so this main character is very much in that style, so she always has a kind of wry comment where she makes fun of people.
Okay,
and
yeah.
sometimes it undercuts the more serious stuff in a
Liz
way
Taylor
that,
style.
Yeah, I guess
Wasn't one of the
maybe-
Mitfords big with Hitler?
Yeah, oh yeah, two of them. So Unity Mitford was
Unity,
like
that's it.
his little BFF who would come and sit and have tea with him and gossip, and he would entertain her. I've read this recently. He would entertain her by doing impressions of Mussolini.
No way.
Really weird shit. She learned German for him. She moved to Germany for him so she could like hang around. I mean, very weird stuff. And Diana Mitford, her sister, was the wife of Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Fascist Party. But then they had their sister Nancy was the writer who then denounced Diana when they were interning enemy aliens and fascists when the war started. She denounced her own sister. And Jessica was a communist. Their sister Jessica was a communist. And then there was a couple more, but they weren't as interesting.
Holy fuck, yeah. That covers quite the range.
Yeah.
Jesus.
It's fascinating. They're a fascinating family. They're amazing.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What happened? Do you know what happened to them at the end of the war? Did they? I mean, she moved to Germany and it all went tits up. Spoiler alert.
She shot herself. Oh my God. Unity shot herself in front of the Reichstag when the
Okay.
war was declared, and then she kind of missed.
Oh boy! Yeah.
I shouldn't laugh at this, but she's a Nazi, so it's fine.
Yeah.
She ended up like a vegetable in some
Oh, no.
hospital or something, and I think she like lived for a while, but. You know, whatever. If you're stupid enough to want to be friends with Hitler and then you shoot yourself in
Yeah,
front
and
of
you
the
can't
Reichstag.
even follow through on the suicide.
I know.
Look down on you, I'm afraid.
So ridiculous.
Simple.
So
yeah,
dumb.
one job.
Diana lived in. She and Mosley were like. They were interned, but they were given like special privileges.
Of
So they
course.
had a little garden and they were allowed to live together, whatever. And I don't know what happened to them when they got out. I mean, I know there were fascist movements in Britain after the war.
Yeah,
I don't think he
sure.
was heading them up. I think there were plenty of people who were very vocal about Hitler before the war and then were just slightly less vocal after the war.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like, I don't think it changed their minds. I used to work with someone whose mother-in-law, who was a German Jew, who was a, quote, enemy alien, who was interned with Diana Mitford
Oh,
at the beginning of the
really?
war. Just, can you imagine? You've escaped Nazi Germany to be interned with some British fascist.
Yeah.
Some upper-class British fascist.
My grandfather was interned. Was he? Yeah. And he's a German Jew. I mean, fled to this country being like, oh, fuck, the Nazis are mental. And they're like, right, you're interned.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah. It's
This is
like,
madness.
those are the, that's your enemy.
Yeah. It's fucking insane,
Wild.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so where did we get to? We got to your first place, Sex and the City. So from there to, obviously, COVID and then career change.
A little bit, yeah.
What were some of the highs and lows of writing theatre and doing all of that?
Oh, I mean, I am still writing theatre.
Of course.
I haven't.
You
left
never
it
give up on
behind.
it. It's
never
always
give up,
there.
Never give up on theatre. It's like an abusive relationship. Just keep letting it abuse you. Highs and lows. I guess when I moved to the UK and I did this MA program, and it was the time of like all those big kind of devisey kind of total theater companies like Complicité and Knee High and Frantic Assembly, and deviate, and I was so kind of inspired by that, and I sort of developed a way of working with actors and collaboration, and I did a lot of experimenting in rehearsal rooms. Shout out to my dear friend and longtime collaborator Jessica Beck, who directed Agent of Influence, upon which the book is based. She and I met as young, keen PhD students, and she was studying stuff about the mind-body split in acting training.
Ooh.
And we did lots of interesting kind of... The stuff that she was trying out on actors on the play that I had written gave me ideas about how to devise, and I did a lot of that kind of stuff, and I worked for many years with this all-female theater company, which was a thing in the early 2000s. You know, it was a big deal being but you're going to write a play with no men in it? How is that possible? You know, and that was very freeing and exciting. I did a lot of experimenting on them. They were very game to let me kind of, devise and play around. Just did lots of being in my 20s and playing in rehearsal rooms and trying stuff out, and that was really cool. It was really fun, and I learned about dramaturgy because dramaturgy was still kind of new in the UK, and it kind of felt like I could make the rules up as I went along. I don't know. I worked on all kinds of...
Give me a low. Come on, give me a low.
A low.
Dig deep.
Oh,
We'll rescue it. Don't worry. We won't just stay in the low. But go on.
I mean,
What have you got?
every the relentless stream of rejections.
Oh right, yeah. Sure.
It's not one low. It's a cumulative low of the abuse you take.
Yeah.
Of the constant, or seeing other people get stuff and being like, oh, that person got that thing because they're connected to so-and-so, or they're related to so-and-so, or they're sleeping with so-and-so, or whatever. And, not going to name names, but, I think I've been really blessed with good collaborators, but, there have been some occasions in which it usually comes down to, poor rehearsal room communication, unclear hierarchies, stuff like that. Feeling at sea with a script and then feeling at sea in a rehearsal room and then having feeling like you don't know what's going on, or it's just sort of, I think the things that fortunately don't happen so much anymore because I know more and I know who to work with and get a better sense of instincts around people. Whenever I've been I don't think this person is right for this project or isn't right for me as a collaborator, now I'm better at listening to that, I think.
Yeah, work in progress, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because for all the stories we hear about sort of divas and all of that stuff, actually you come across remarkably few of them.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why you hear the stories, because they're the ones that stand out. And
I mean, if you're obviously if you're on the level of Beyonce or J-Lo or something, you've earned the right to, but also diva is kind of it's I feel like sometimes it feels like a misogynistic kind of a way of labeling women.
I wasn't only thinking of women. I know men who
male
are divas.
divas, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think men it might be a
for
little
me.
bit different, but I feel like diva is usually used to describe women.
Oh.
But
what's the catch-all expression then? Because then my mind goes to drama queen, and then you could say queen. That's gendered, I suppose.
Yeah,
so what is
it's a good question. I think these things are really, even if we apply them to other genders, I think they initially are kind of, I think it's female performers who are more likely to be labeled difficult or demanding or something like that. I mean, what would you call
a dickhead?
Yeah,
there we go. That's sex specific.
Yeah.
But that's much more a catch-all.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm
gonna have to look up where the word diva comes from now to understand. Feels Italian to me, but I don't know.
Maybe it's connected to opera or something.
Could be. Yeah. It'll go back to this one part. This one person did this one particular way in 1540, and that's how it's come to us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh dear. to be a bit hyperbolic for a second, seeing as you've been studying fascism lately, do you see any trends of that out there? Because this word is thrown around a lot.
No, don't be ridiculous. We're fine. It's a thing of the past. I mean, we might not call it fascism now. As in some cases we do, in some cases we don't. I mean, I can't remember who says history doesn't repeat itself, but it echoes.
That's a nice one.
But I think, we're definitely seeing an uptick in, quotes, strongman leaders,
right.
some of whom are women. For instance,
there we
Italy,
go. Oh,
Giorgia
the reverse
Meloni,
diva.
the reverse diva. And, it's a sort of, we see these patterns of war, economic instability, movement of people, migration, fear. Then the media and politicians get jingoistic and make people afraid and get us all talking about like falling birth rates and migrants coming over the border, and all that stuff. And then it kind of depends on how strong your democratic system is and how it functions or how it doesn't function and how it can then maybe be manipulated by the party that's in power. And it's, I think all countries now are really on a spectrum of more to less democratic. But even within so-called relatively stable or healthy democracies, then you have to ask yourselves questions around like freedom of the press and things like that. So it's complicated, but we were certainly seeing swings in the direct. I mean, Erdogan just got reelected in Turkey, but then on the other hand, Thailand is sort of seems to be moving in a direction of more democratic, anti-imperial government. So I guess every part of the world is going to have a swing in one direction or another.
But Thailand did that also about 7 or 8 years ago, didn't they? And then they had a coup. So there's there's always they've got very strong military there and very royalist.
It's always the military is always the problem.
Yeah, because it's interesting, like going back to the Wallace thing and Edward. It's interesting to think. I think the everyday person wouldn't think that Number 10 could in effect say no, she's not going to be the queen, and that would actually have to be the order of the day. And in a place like Thailand, I don't feel like that is really on the cards. No. It'll just be like, no, I'll set the rules. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing that I don't think any king had ever abdicated before
I don't believe
or
so.
since. I mean, they had beheaded a king.
Sure.
People had died and not lived very long, but no one had voluntarily abdicated.
No. My understanding is he never thought he was really going to be king.
Yeah. He kind of never really wanted to be king. He knew he was going to be king because he was the oldest and his father wasn't well for years, but I think he just really didn't want it.
Yeah.
To be... Not that I really want to be generous to Nazi King Edward, but it does sound like, as we've been hearing about recently with the royal family, it does sound like there was a pattern of, quite entrenched emotional abuse within the royal family. I mean, he was raised by, sounds like a very draconian, so it's the system of boarding schools and cold showers and cold parents and nanny, all that kind of stuff. Does I think lead to depression, psychosis, mental illness.
No, definitely. Have you ever heard about the are they cousins of Queen Elizabeth who were born with congenital defects?
Oh, that was on The Crown.
Oh, was it? I do not know. I don't watch that show.
Yeah, it was
they covered it, did they?
They did. Yeah, there was a whole thing about...
I always assumed The Crown was just like rah, 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 up the royals.
No, I mean, different people have different opinions on The Crown. I think they've done a pretty good job of not... I mean, sometimes it does feel like they're being a bit too...
bootlicky.
Friendly, but I think sometimes they do it in ways that feels like it makes sense dramaturgically.
Right, fair enough.
Because you need people who grow and change to have good character arcs,
absolutely.
even if the real people might not be growing and changing. Right. But I think that they have been relatively critical at times. I mean, it's not... I don't have any particular I'll put it this way. I am not a royalist.
No.
I have no particular interest in the royal family, but I found The Crown very compelling because it was good writing and good drama and interesting. And the palace complains that a lot of it is fictionalized and whatever, but
do they indeed?
But who cares?
They
did talk about. I think they did talk about.
They talked about. I think their cousins who were just
locked away.
Locked away and never spoke about. And they officially wrote that they died.
Yes,
they didn't even give them death certificate. They just wrote in a book, but they hadn't died.
They covered up all kinds of. My favorite episode was about Prince Philip's mother, who had been institutionalized, and then she became a nun. She was Greek, and she became a nun, and then at the end of her life, they brought her into the palace because Greece had like a coup or a revolution or something, and it was all about him realizing how his mother shouldn't have been institutionalized. She was deaf or hard of hearing, and it made people think that she was.
No way.
Yeah, it's sort of basically like the mistreatment of disabled people in the kind of early 20th century. But they dealt with it, I think they downplayed things like, Prince Philip being real racist, but
right.
Guess you pick and choose what you want to show.
Is the Andrew arc in there, or are they just like, he doesn't exist? Let's pretend he's not there.
It's funny. I'm trying to think of. I don't think they spend much time with him.
Oh, good.
but you can kind of see. I'm trying to think back of when they kind of portrayed him in the sort of 60s, 70s as like a sort of swinging young man, and he's creepy as hell.
Yeah.
He's creepy as hell. So I think there's some, you read into it what you want to, I think. But I guess there's like one last season, so maybe he'll be, I don't know. They're picking and choosing. They've really gone on the Diana train and the most obviously because that's the best story to tell. That's the most interesting story to tell. I mean, whatever, it's TV.
Yeah, fair enough.
But as much as people complain, it's like it's high production value entertainment.
Yeah, I'm sure they would keep going if they could, but it's sailing a bit close to the present, isn't it?
Which I think is really funny. I think they should just keep going.
Just have Meghan playing Meghan.
The Truman Show. Forever. I would love to see Meghan play Meghan.
Yeah, she does it all the time. Turned on the TV.
Oh, gosh. Someone was asking, maybe my publisher was asking me about, do I see Meghan as a Wallace Simpson and Harry as an Edward VIII, and it's like...
It's a bit different, isn't it?
So,
I mean, he really never thinks he's going to be king. It would be an extraordinary...
But also, Harry and Meghan are, whatever, have whatever opinion you want on them. They're two people who got married and then they left because they felt the family was had an abusive dynamic, and were racist, which, hey, probably true.
Looks like it was true.
And that, whatever, they're like rich people who live in Santa Barbara, who cares? Let them do what they want to do. But they're not Nazis. It's like Wallace and Edward, Nazis passing information to the German government during the war and throughout the war. Harry and Meghan, slightly narcissistic, self-interested people who live in Santa Barbara. There's no comparison.
No. I mean, I've actually been a little bit impressed with him this last week. I mean, the day of recording, he's
the first royal to testify in court since Edward VII.
Yeah, against scumbag practices by the newspapers who deserve to be called out for what they did. I mean, outrageous. So I think that takes a certain amount of courage.
Yeah, I think to, however he did it is however he did it.
Yeah.
But to sort of completely break ties and stand up for the thing that you believe in. I mean, I'm happy with anything that chips away at the royal family. It's great, blow it all up.
Now, did you know, here's a little factoid, that the coins flip the way that the royal is looking, each new royal. Yeah.
Oh.
But the stamp always looks to the right.
Oh, why?
No, to the left. To the left.
I think to the
because
left.
then they're looking down on the address.
Oh.
It would seem a bit rude if they were looking
in the other
Sounds like a joke, but it's
Oh
true.
my god. Sometimes the minutia of, it's like I was watching the coronation or a little bit.
Oh, I watched
a
a little bit
little.
of it. Just for the bizarre
Yes.
through the... Yeah, okay,
just
you're
the
the same
bizarre
as me.
ritual. Yeah, I just want to watch a little bit of the weird ritual.
Yeah.
But it's just like, oh god, this is so... It's so weird.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
I know.
It's like an old man getting undressed behind a screen with a cleric. Like, what is that?
And the weirdest thing about some of those rituals is like, and this ritual was first performed in 1783, and you're like, so they actually actively started doing this next weird bit.
Yeah.
They were like, well, we need to have this. Like, what? And at one point he's like arms are like full of scepters and stuff like this. It's like, what is this? Why is this the... Yeah, I know. It was very bizarre. I had to turn it off after a while. It's just sickening.
It was also
very bizarre.
And the kind of positioning of him as some great, protector of the country is just nauseating. It's just ridiculous.
But he quite likes looking after pigs. That's kind of it.
God.
That's what you've got. I don't know.
Oh, God.
I know. Ridiculous. What do you think? Do you think has the UK got markedly worse since you arrived?
Absolutely.
By every metric?
By every metric, yes.
Do you think we're due a Labour win in the next election and things are going to get immeasurably better overnight? Or are you pessimistic?
I mean, I don't think anything gets immeasurably better overnight. Who knows how, what trade-offs Labour has to make to get into power and, whatever. But... I'm not going to say it can't be any worse because it can always get worse, but like,
does seem we're ploughing a new ditch, doesn't it?
We are really scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Does feel like that
with this government, and it's a bit like Trump. It's like, what's the thing they have to do to make people disapprove? But I do think if we had a general election tomorrow,
they'd lose.
Yeah, I don't know how they would win.
I think that's why they're not calling it. They're holding on for some freak thing to happen that they can capitalise on. Yeah. And then be like, see? Yeah. We're good. Yeah. And hope that people forget all of the other shit.
Like an earthquake or something?
I don't know.
It's just... They're so awful. And I was reading an article about how sort of the trouble that the SNP has had recently is, it's like I don't wish the SNP or Scotland ill at all, but like maybe it's good for a Labour win because then people won't be voting for the SNP. Sorry, Scotland.
Sorry, Scotland.
We're gonna need your votes.
You can have a referendum in 20 years' time, just after we fix everything else.
Can we just... your neighbours downstairs need to fix some things, then we'll let you move out.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, dear. Yes, indeed. Well, look, the book is out. The Socialite Spy is out in October 25th.
October
is it? Am I
19th.
19th?
October 19th. But you can pre-order it if you would like. Online, you can... just type in the Socialite Spy.
Mm-hmm. Or click the link in the episode notes.
Click the link in the episode notes.
Yeah, that will be right there. And Sarah Sigal, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Robert Neumark Jones.
My
pleasure. This was a pleasure.
Cool. Thanks for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please give us 5 stars and consider becoming a subscriber and maybe even supporting us on Patreon. Really, really, really helps me continue making this show. If you haven't enjoyed it, then you can fuck off. Many, many thanks to Nils Hennis-Steer for the amazing music and to Dave Fox for the cool artwork. Please keep coming back every week for more Bliss of the Abyss.
Message 1.
DC.
No, he isn't.
Yeah.
Who with?
I think it's Theater J. He says it's triggering lots of things for him around his abusive ex and
Yeah.
the, like some of the anti-Semitic stuff, and he's finding it hard.
I'm sure, yeah. Well, we tried to get it going again here, but he was very reluctant to throw his weight behind
He
it.
is really like, I also think having COVID interrupting his West End debut was probably pretty
You're telling me.
troubling for everybody.
Yes, yeah. But it's good if he's putting it up again in DC. That's good news.
Yeah,
'Cause maybe we can get it going here.
Yeah, I think he says he thinks he wants. That's the last time he wants to do it. It's just like making him anxious being there and watching it, and I think it's a shame. But he
Yeah.
also says he can't imagine this production's going to be as good as yours.
Oh yeah. Nah, I don't believe that for a second.
He's like not. He doesn't sound. He doesn't sound enthusiastic about it. I think he's a bit.
Yeah, I think that was the barrier to getting it going here.
Yeah.
So obviously we need him on board to get it going, but
Yeah.
he's got all his blocks
Yeah.
sort of around it.
Yeah.
Which, you know.
I mean, I think he should let it be out in the world.
I think so.
Fly like a bird.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important.
Yeah. But, you know, that's his deal,
Yeah.
not mine.